Last week, Obama signed a cybersecurity executive order. The order came across as rather bland and reasonable to most privacy experts, including the ACLU, and this gave the overall impression that Obama has no intention of launching an attack on the internet. This was a smokescreen, and I'm going to show you why. On February 5th of 2013, the White House announced plans to establish a new interagency working group to counter online radicalization. The working group will be headed by the White House National Security Staff. Quinton Wiktorowicz, the Senior Director for Community Partnerships in the National Security Staff, made the following statement. Violent extremist groups like Al-Qaeda, its affiliates and its adherents, violent supremacist groups, and violent sovereign citizens are leveraging online tools and resources to propagate messages of violence and division. It should be abundantly clear here that when they make this statement, they're trying to group in anti-government activists like us. And they're throwing us in with a mix of slurs to intentionally discredit us. Note the use of the adjective violent attached to sovereign citizens, and how they say that these groups are propagating messages of violence and division. Division being the key here, because that can be interpreted as any speech turning people against the U.S. government. Now all this comes as CISPA, H.R. 624, passed the House and heads once again to the Senate. CISPA, or the Cyber Information Sharing and Protection Act, is geared towards setting up programs and infrastructure to make it easier for private companies to share user information with the government, as well as setting up provisions which effectively position officers of the U.S. government inside such companies. Under CISPA, any information given to the government by private companies would be exempt from the Freedom of Information Act, meaning that citizens would have no means of verifying that their personal information had been handed over. The bill also makes those sharing this information with the government permanently immune from civil or criminal proceedings, both in state and federal courts. In this initial form, company cooperation with the program will be voluntary, but history shows that this is merely a foot in the door tactic. This was evident in a quote recently made by Dutch Ruppersberger, the Baltimore County Democrat who is leading the charge to get CISPA passed. If we have a catastrophic cyber attack like 9/11, we'll get all the bills passed we want. But right now, we're focused on this bill. Ruppersberger was also quoted as saying, "It's almost as if we need to have another 9/11, and we can't," he said. "And that's why we need to do these things ahead of time." Now let's put this into perspective. With Obama's executive order which facilitates government sharing information to private companies, with CISPA which sets up the infrastructure for private companies to share user information to the government, with full immunity of course, and Obama's new working group to counter online radicalization targeting ideological extremists, what does that give us? It should be clear that they are laying the groundwork for a system which would allow the government to tag a citizen as a radical extremist and subsequently cut them off from private communication services such as the internet or hosting providers. Now in its current form, this may not give the full authority that they desire. As Ruppersberger stated, they need a 9/11 type event to get what they really want. But these new moves will establish the early infrastructure and make the next stages easier. The second point that should be obvious here is that the hacking activities of Anonymous are being used to justify these new laws. I personally don't know if those carrying out these hacks in anonymous names are sincere or if there's something more malicious at foot. It's actually impossible to say because Anonymous is by definition faceless and therefore completely unaccountable and unverifiable. Anyone can set up an account with a Guy Fawkes mask and a disguised voice and call themselves Anonymous. In fact, it should be clear that this is already happening. The entire concept of Anonymous is inherently flawed for this very reason. Yes, there are some formidable hackers using the label, and maybe those who have been attacking the U.S. government websites recently were trying to help the cause of freedom. But the reality of the matter is that this isn't helping the cause. We aren't going to win by hacking websites. The powers that be aren't in control because we lack some piece of secret information. We have plenty of information. The powers that be are in control because the sleeping masses don't want to see what's right in front of their eyes. This is what we have to change if we want to make a difference. Hacking a government network is an act of war. And in the paradigm of war, the government is in its element. Just look at the quotes by Ruppersberger. It should be clear, they want you to attack. This will give them the excuse to pass the proposals that they already have waiting in the wings. Proposals like the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace, endorsed by the White House, essentially marking the beginning of the end of online anonymity. I've made numerous statements in the past telling people to call out those who are proposing the initiation of violence. Even if it hasn't sunk in for you just how important the non-aggression principle is on a philosophical level, it should be important at this point why it's so important on a tactical level. The same principle applies to online attacks as well. Breaking into business and government networks isn't going to help us right now. It's only going to create the pretext for new laws. Activists need to be very clear about that. Yes, the government is corrupt. Yes, these corporations are corrupt. And yes, it may be morally justifiable to disrupt those systems, but it is strategically and tactically ill-conceived to do so at this particular point in time. The next stage of this police state takeover is going to target political dissidents. Don't make it easier for them. If you want more content like this, please subscribe to this channel, Storm Clouds Gathering, here on YouTube. If you want to interact and have a say in future videos, please follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/stormcloudsgathering and on Twitter at Collapse Updates. Also be sure to check out our website, stormcloudsgathering.com.